Okay. Let's do another one of these. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Michael Markowski. Welcome to my studio. Today we are going to continue the beginning of our journey to understand acrylic painting. Over the past 2 episodes, today's episode number 3, over the past 2 episodes we learned basically how to set up a very simple studio and all the little things that might be worth considering before you begin, like having some cloths and rags nearby in case a disaster should happen. And then last week's episode we began painting a color wheel, and there's a template that we used to do this version, and we also did one without a template that we drew. So I showed how to transfer an image or get an image onto a canvas started really quickly, and that's the basis for a lot of the artwork that we've been doing over the past year and a half. So let's just sort of take a look at the overview for today's episode. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint the inside of the color wheel, and as we do that, I think it's going to clarify a lot of maybe questions that people have. So you're certainly welcome to ask questions in the chat, or even after this video airs live, which it's doing right now. And we're also going to learn how to mix our own black, because we can mix black from the colors that we used last week. I mean, you could certainly buy black, and I do have black, and I do use black occasionally, but I think even if you don't even mix your own black, knowing how to do it is a game changer for most people when they begin painting. And once we know how to make a black, we can make our own gray, and we're also going to learn how to make our own browns, and then from there we can also make our own skin tones, right? Because everyone's skin tone is some variation thereof of a brown. Now, as we go forward, we can learn that we might paint skin green and orange and blue, not just when we're trying to do something kind of wild and crazy and abstract, but because sometimes that light is reflected on our faces. But that's a whole other thing we'll get to eventually here. So, let's, even before we jump too far into that, let's just sort of show you a little bit, a couple little housekeeping things, one of which is the private Facebook group just for people like yourself that are watching. There's been tons and tons of, it basically doubled in size over the past few weeks, which is awesome. I love that there's so many new people who are getting interested in making art and wanting to learn the basics, because once we learn the basics, we can certainly do amazing things. And those of you that's been with me for almost 2 years now know what you can achieve once we apply these basic principles that we're going to learn today. And also, once a month, I go through all of the artwork that people have been posting on the Facebook group and give people feedback. So that's usually one of the things that people appreciate the most about all of these classes, and because it's helped us create this really incredible community of artists. The other thing that I want to mention is the Dropbox folder. And in the Dropbox folder, you're going to see the beginners files or folders are at the very top of this, because this is a big folder. There's a lot of stuff in here. But all of the beginner stuff is at the top. And when we start next, in 2 weeks, we're going to start painting very simple versions of some of the most famous paintings ever. And so those paintings are going to be at the very, very top. You can see they got a 00 at the top. And then if you feel comfortable moving on from that, then you can approach the other 100+ episodes we've already done. And for those of us who've maybe been painting for a little while and feel a little bit more confident and understand some of the basics, I'm going to be posting all of the new episodes at the very bottom of this folder. So there'll be a new one here in just this Thursday. We're going to be painting Thomas Gainsborough's Blue Boy, which at one time was the most famous painting on Earth. And so that's a whole other episode that will take place this Thursday, because I know some of you who've been with me for a long time are anxious to get back into some more advanced classes. So that's going to be at the bottom here. So let's take a look. I just want to do a couple of little things maybe before we get into actually putting paint on the palette and starting to mix paint. Just maybe almost a bit of a review. And so this is what we're going to do. We're going to be painting the inside, or I call the spokes of the color wheel. And last episode at the very end, a number of questions kind of came up, and we looked at James Gurney's color wheel, which is in one of his books, Color in Light. He's got a number of great books beyond the Dinotopia series that he created. These are just from the library, but I mean, if you wanted, I think James Gurney is one of the great living illustrators, artists of our time, and these are two great intro books that you could certainly invest in if you really want to get really, really far down the rabbit hole. But we looked at this this image from inside of his book, Color and Light, and I also I didn't do this last week. I just did this about 20 minutes before we started here, just to kind of help illustrate which colors we are using for these classes. Because if you go into the art supply store, you see that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different tubes of paint, different brands, and all these kind of things, and it becomes very overwhelming for the beginner artist. So what I've done is selected 6 colors, and these, you see there's 2 yellows, 2 reds, and 2 blues, and there's a cool and a warm one of each. And you could certainly select a slight variation of this, and you might get slightly different colors than I'm getting. You know, if you were going to get a cool yellow, you'd probably want to be looking at colors in this area as opposed to going into the greens, right? Anyway, these are the colors that we have been painting with. And last week, essentially, this is what we did, right? When we painted the outside of the color wheel, we mixed, for instance, with our warm blue and our cool red. We mixed them together, warm blue, cool red. In fact, let's just go here. And this is a little bit confusing because the colors are inverted on his versus mine. So just have to, we've got the greens on the left, whereas I've got the greens on the right, but it doesn't matter it's which side you put it on. But essentially, let's say we mixed our warm blue with cool red, and in between we've got our purples or violets, right? And same thing, we did our cool blue with our cool yellow, and we got these bright greens. Now when I do this right across, it gives the impression that we've got some pretty muddy greens, when in fact I would say the greens that we've got are much more saturated, have a higher chroma than as it appears here. And then we also have our warm yellow and the warm red, which we mixed, and we're getting these oranges. So what we want to do today is we want to sort of start examining what's going to happen if, for instance, we mix our cool yellow with not the cool blue, but the warm blue. The cool yellow with the cool red, cool yellow with the warm red. And we'll do this for all of the colors to see what happens when we're mixing across the color wheel. Right? And then when all's said and done, we've got all of the possible combinations in here, just one-on-one, right? So that's why you'll see all of these spikes here, or spokes, sorry, within the color wheel, as I call it. So that's going to be the first thing that we are going to do today. I just want to also just mention that there's a number of incredible resources out here. Actually, well, maybe even before I talk about the resources, it's worth just talking about how contested this space of color and color theory actually is. Because I'm not preaching saying that I have figured it out. I will say that I began these episodes almost 2 years ago with a kind of a theory, a hypothesis that, yes, I've used this, and we've done, maybe when I've been teaching in person, about 10 different paintings, and it works pretty well. But can it really work if we apply it to as many possible paintings from across every culture imaginable? Can it still work? And I would argue, yes, my theory applies to every single possible painting. But again, I'll just preface that by saying, that I am, in a way, all of these episodes are sort of proving or attempting to prove or disprove a theory that other artists have been obsessed with for a long time. So we're just looking here. I just want to show you that there are literally thousands of different kinds of color wheels that artists have been playing with throughout history. And each one of these little diagrams you see, there are PhD theses and textbooks written about each one. There are followers of each one, maybe some more than others for sure. And you'll see some famous names on here, most names you probably don't recognize. And even today, there's usually every episode that comes by, there's always one or two people who says, have you heard of such and such a wheel, or such and such a color mixing system? And I will say yes or no, I mean, depending on which one it is. But color it's such an interesting, complex subject that I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole because it can get confusing really quickly. Like, I was just thinking earlier today that I've probably investigated and read more about color than most people I know, and yet I still feel like I barely understand any of it. And sometimes I have to read some of the same things over and over because I'm like, what on, like, so it is a very complex subject. And I have an artist's mind, not a scientist's mind. So what I've been trying to do for the past 20 years is really condense everything that I've read down into something that is manageable and understandable, especially for a beginner artist. Right, so we can keep this continues going down here with like the history of color and the color wheel. And here's another page. In fact, let's just skip all of that. I was going to continue, but I'm sure a lot of people are like, yeah, okay, the point is, it's confusing. Let's move on. Let's do some illumination rather than confusion. I will say, if nothing else, if after today's episode, I would urge you to watch this video by Gamblin Whale Paint. So you can see this is how I would Google it: Gamblin Navigating Color Space. Gamblin is the oil paint brand that I've been using for 20 years. I love Gamblin paint. I've been to the factory, which is just a warehouse in Portland, Oregon. Awesome. I mean, just watching paint being made will blow your mind. And they're really great. Most paint companies around the world are maybe 20 people on staff, and you can call them up and ask them questions about their paint and colors, and usually there's somebody whose job is there to answer questions. So I just put that out there because sometimes we have an idea that you're like trying to contact the CEO of McDonald's or something. Paint companies, it's a relatively small industry. But this is an incredible video, and I want to see if there's some images here. There's not an image. Let me see if there's... Basically, what is amazing about that video is it's an animation that kind of shows us the concept of the color wheel that I subscribe to most adherently. I don't know. And so it just makes, I think it makes things make a lot more sense than probably I can do just with the class today. Here's James Gurney's blog. There's all these links are in the description below. Is there anything else I want to mention? This is maybe even a more specific version of what all these colors in than even James Gurney's image that I mentioned earlier, which goes even more specific. I think a few things that I would want. What do I want? Is there anything I want to mention here? Maybe not. Maybe let's just get right into the painting, because you can clearly see I could fall down a rabbit hole very quickly here. So, again, today, this is what we're going to do. We're going to mix all of the spokes inside the color wheel. We're going to learn how to make our own black, gray, browns, and then skin tones from that. So, let's dive into the painting. So, if last week you used the template and you traced it out and you painted along with me, then you're all set, ready to go. If, however, you didn't have a template, you don't have access to a printer, that's okay. What I'm going to do just right off the top is I'm just going to draw the lines in here just to help anyone who's not at that step yet. So I'm just going to get a pencil out. Okay, and we could, I guess I was going to say we don't need a ruler, but I think just for our sake here. So I'm going to start here with my yellow. And I want to see what the yellow does when I connect it to these reds across the color wheel. Essentially, by the time I'm done here, what I want to see is 3 spokes coming out of each of my main my 2 yellows, my 2 reds, and my 2 blues. Right? So let's do this for the other yellow. And you can sort of make it like little bridges, and you can, like a super highway or something with these lines crisscrossing, going underneath one another if you like. And we need one going to the blue. So this, is maybe a little bit confusing perhaps for some people if you're just drawing this out. That's why it might be helpful to refer to the template, which is in the Dropbox folder. I guess I should have mentioned where that is. That's in the very, very top of the Dropbox link in the description there. So here we have, this is going to come into play quite a lot in these episodes, where we see our warm red and our cool blue literally right across the color wheel from one another. And now we're just going to go with our reds and blues. And I don't think I've ever seen anyone do like paint the color wheel quite like this before until I started doing it. This is just something that made sense to me. If you see something you think makes more sense, please let me know. Put a link in the description below, and because I would love to know what that is, because I certainly want to make these episodes as straightforward as possible for even a beginner to get started here. So this is what this is what we call the neutral core, and I'll label that after I've painted it. And we're also going to draw some circles on the outside in a little bit as well for our browns, but let's get to that when we get to it. So we've got now this and this. Let's put some paint on the palette. Okay. Wow, lots of people in the chat, lots of comments in there. That's so cool. People have been busy painting and drawing since I last saw all of you guys. You know, maybe I should just mention, since I got these books on the table, one of the things that I've been doing over the past week is doing research into Sylvia Pankhurst, who some people may recognize the name because she, along with her mother and sisters, was, you know, a very famous activist, suffragette, a British suffragette at the turn of the last century. And she was also, she basically gave up her art career for the cause of women's right to vote and freedom. And so we're going to do a painting of hers, I think, in May. But that's, you can see that I'm planning like 5 months or so in advance of each one of these episodes. So, great, I mean, super interesting person. Holy smokes. But just thought I would since I've got all these books, by the time that we actually film that episode, those books will have long been returned back to the library. So that you can see there's a lot of work that goes on in behind the scenes for each one of these episodes. And it's stuff that I certainly really enjoy doing. Because I love learning new things. And I especially love learning about artists that I'm maybe a little bit less familiar with. Okay, eventually we're going to put some white inside here as we're going to start to mix our grays and skin tones later on. But for right now, we want to just sort of paint the inside of this color wheel. Okay, so I got my paint on here. I always tell people to put about as much paint on your palette as toothpaste on your toothbrush. Obviously, it looks like I really need to brush my teeth a little bit more because there's a lot of toothpaste on my toothbrush right here. So let's get a paintbrush out, and it doesn't really matter where we begin or where we end. I guess that since I've been drawing some stuff with the cool yellow, maybe we'll start there. Now, what I'm going to do is just like when I mixed my yellows, I began with the yellow and I added more color to it as I went. Because if I start with the red and I start adding yellow to it, I'm going to have to use a lot of yellow to lighten it up to get back to that yellow. So it's always easier to darken the color than it is to lighten the color. Because if it's too dark, then you might as well just clean the paint off of your brush, maybe even use some water and start all over, because it's just going to drive you absolutely bonkers. So let's go to cool yellow and warm red first, right? And the way that I'm going to mix these is I like to kind of take my paint and just get some of the dominant color, or the color that we're going to begin with anyway. I'm going to put a little patch of it right here, and then I'm just going to take a little bit of this red. In fact, that's maybe more than I was hoping to start with. And so this is our warm red and cool yellow, right? Let's take a bit more of it. And then lastly, I'm just going to take even more, mostly warm red. So maybe, in fact, since I've got the other one here, I just want, just as a demonstration, show you how difficult it would be if I started in the opposite direction. So let's say I started with a lot more of this warm red. And so I paint this here, and I got a bit of an orange, or what we would call a red orange. And then if I want this to get lighter, I mean, we can add a bit of this here. But I mean, I would probably have to use almost all of this cool yellow to get back to something that was, you know, approaching this area here. So I mean, I don't even know how much more worth it's to try to like demonstrate this. Let's just continue. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, right? But the idea, so even right now, if we look at this, we could see that this orange, it's not remarkably different than the orange that we mixed out here. In fact, maybe it's a little bit, we'll use this one for explaining things. Right, so previously we mixed our warm yellow with our warm red, and we got a very saturated orange. It looks great, and it's going to be, this is the most saturated, most high chroma, most intense orange that we can get with this palette. We mix our cool yellow and the warm red together, and I would defy most people to really be able to tell the difference between these colors. In fact, if anything, by the, you know, when we get closer to here, we're going to have obviously a more intense yellow than when we are here, right? It's almost like we're continuing that, right? So you'll notice that these oranges share very little difference. And in fact, let's just to kind of highlight that, it's because basically when we mixed these two colors right next to one another, you could see they're very close, right? That's why we get a really nice bright orange. And when we're mixing the cool yellow and the warm red, that cool yellow's not that far away, right? So it's usually when we're mixing, you know, some of the colors that are kind of nearby, the differences are negligible, right? There's going to be a small difference, and we would see that difference appear more and more strongly when we start adding white to that color. Kind of white is a little bit of our secret technique to kind of unveil the hidden workings of a color, I suppose you could say. So I just cleaned my brush. Let's do the warm yellow and cool red. Or yeah, let's stick with the oranges for right now. So we're going to take our warm yellow, because we're going to be washing our brush all the time anyway, so it doesn't really matter, right? So I'm going to take my cool red and mix a bit of that in here. And again, these colors are going to be barely distinguishable from the outer rim of the color wheel, as I call it. All right, and if you want, again, you can kind of play with, you can paint right over top of that line, or let's go right over top of it. Just okay, and then here's a bit more cool red. And I'll say right off, this kind of thing can be a little bit confusing, and it wouldn't surprise me if even myself, as I do this, I get a little bit confused and accidentally paint the wrong color, quote unquote, in the wrong place, or I mean, we could just do our best we can, and always just remember that it's just a painting, right? It's not a reflection of who you are as a person. Doesn't mean you're either really, really smart or stupid because you make a mistake. Happens to everybody, right? And especially when we're just beginning. Maybe I'm just gonna go do this yellow here again, just a little bit. Okay. So Heidi says, "Hi everyone, I went through these color lessons last time in order to catch up, but ended up spending more time trying to figure out how to mix my colors. I'm really glad to be learning here again." That's awesome, Heidi. I'm glad to have you back here. I think, even for myself, I mean, I've just been reading all this stuff about color theory again, some of the same things I've read many times in the past, and it is really interesting how every time I dive into it, I feel like I learn a little bit more. So now let's take our cool yellow and our cool red. So now we're mixing right across, well, not right across the color wheel, but we're going further across, right? So now we're going to be taking our cool yellow and our cool red. So you can see they're much further away from one another on the color wheel, right? So we're kind of going all the way across here, which is bringing us closer to what we call the neutral core. And this will make more sense as we get closer to, as we complete more of this painting. So again, we'll take our, get a little bit more. It's also just having a really nice color wheel in your studio can sometimes feel kind of just nice to see. It's just as a reference to, like, there are even more complex color mixing guides that you can do that I had to do when I was in art school, that sort of take all of these ideas to the next level. To literally try mixing every color together, not just our split primaries, the reds, yellows, and blues, but what happens when we mix each version of these oranges with each green and with each purple. I mean, you can really fall down a rabbit hole very quickly. Oops, let's do one more on this here. So again, we look at this, probably for the most part, the differences are very negligible. Even with our cool red and cool yellow, it's not going to be quite as saturated as what we see here, but probably most people wouldn't be able to tell the difference, right? So there's a few things I want to say about that, but I think let's continue here. Otherwise, I'm just going to blow your mind. Everyone will just be like, "What? This is too complex." As I said, that's why I think that there's very little content out there for absolutely pure basic beginner painters. There's a lot of stuff for artists. A lot of the teaching of acrylic painting is sort of like very advanced artists talking to other very advanced artists, and which all of that, there's certainly a use for all of that. But if you're really trying to begin, I mean, I'm biased because this is my own project that I've kind of been working on for decades, but I haven't seen anything. If there was something better than what I'm doing, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, because I would just be like, just watch that, read that book. That will tell you what to do. I got other things to do, right? Just talk. I mean, that's. I just had to. Yeah, I'm working on a graphic novel, and it's. I could probably be doing other things with my time. So let's now do. Let's do our greens. So let's move this over here. So where should we start? Let's do our cool yellow and warm blue, I suppose. So make sure that's clean, because we want to make sure our brush is clean. We don't want to have any red on our brush when we're trying to mix greens, because as we'll see a little bit later on, that's going to result in a brown, right? So when you're trying to mix these colors, you want to make sure you have a clean palette and that your colors haven't been contaminated. Now, if you've watched any of my episodes in the past, you've probably seen me making a big mess when with my paint, my palette start to get pretty messy. And I actually like that there might be a little bit of brown in my greens, a little bit, or red in my greens to make it a bit more brownish as the painting develops. But that's another discussion entirely, right? Okay, so I probably took way too much blue on there, so let's just get rid of some of that blue, because you could see how quickly that blue makes this green go, this yellow turn into green. So I'm mixing my cool yellow with my warm blue. My warm blue, my ultramarine blue, and this is like a Hansa yellow. Right, very subtle. Get a little bit more blue, a little bit more green. Just keep on going. Right, so I think already we can see quite a difference, right? Because we had this very candy colored green here, right? These emerald greens, lime yellows, like beautiful colors that really there's very little of these colors that exist in nature, except where light is maybe hitting a leaf and giving it some like really spectacular highlights. But these type of colors would probably be used quite seldomly in a painting. But it's nice to know you have them available to you, right? Whereas when we start mixing these other greens in here, and especially if we can kind of give it a little bit, again, that little bit of a brownish quality, this is where we start to getting a brown that has a bit more of or green that has a bit more of a grassy color, right? Which I think is often the kind of color that people want. So usually when I'm painting a landscape, I very rarely will use just cool yellow and cool blue, unless I'm actually adding a little bit of white to it. Lolly says, or Tanya says, I did color theory in college, but this is a valuable refresher. And Lolly says, it blows my mind that I studied art in high school and college and never did a single minute of color theory. I've learned more in a few months with these classes than I ever did in years of school. Yeah, and Tanya says, I say they'd skipped over the essential. I also went to art school. We never did one of these color wheels when I was in art school, so I totally know what you're saying, Lolly. It's bizarre, but... And I've actually, I teach at a university here in Vancouver, and I've done this with my 3rd and 4th year students, and I've seen, again, I get that same reaction. We've never done this before. Like, how is it possible that we're going all the way through the school and no one's done this? But usually by the end, everyone's like, whoa, that just blew my mind. I wish I had learned that earlier. And I say, Well, I wish I could teach everyone in this class, or in this school, the things I know, but that's a whole other thing. Okay, so now we're going to take our warm yellow, and we're going to mix it with our warm blue. So let's just sort of take a quick look here. So we're taking our warm yellow, mixing it with our warm blue. So previously we did our cool yellow and cool blues, but now we're going very close through the neutral core here. Now, if we were to, and we'll actually, let's just see how it plays out. Rather than just me explaining how it will play out, let's just play it out. So I want to be careful that I don't get any of this color in here. We're going to a different part of that blue. Right, I love this color here. Just adding a little bit more blue. The other one done simultaneous to that, because I want to be able to have a second one that I can use, or maybe even paint on if need be. Okay, and you can see maybe even it's worth just taking a bit more of this blue. Because sometimes we don't want this pure warm blue, we want it diluted, and often most of the time people just add black or white to the color to desaturate the color, and that works. It works, but as we'll talk about in, is it next class or the class after? When we talk about adding value, mixing black and gray and white into colors, it does something very different than adding other colors into your color. So we can add a little bit of warm yellow or a little bit of cool yellow, and it'll just sort of take the intense edge off that color and bring it a little closer towards the center, right? Remember that the more the colors on the outside are, the more brighter, the more intense, the more saturated, the higher the chroma content is. The chroma is like the intensity of the color. So now let's go to warm yellow and cool blue. So let's take our warm yellow and cool blue. And, you know, sometimes I do these and I'm like, wow, you know, these are some colors I don't usually mix that often. And so it's, for me, again, it's a good little reminder of like, oh yeah, that's a cool color. Like I like this color a lot. I'm just going to wipe that off. I'm just going to go for a little bit, almost pure blue. Okay, so again, I think it's really important to note that none of these other combinations of blue and yellow were able to achieve the same level of intensity of color, the saturation that we did when we did the cool yellow and the cool blue. We got pretty close, you know, maybe this warm yellow. We got especially closer to this area here, but you could see how much more kind of muddy or brownish, especially the warm blue and warm yellow are, because again, they're crossing over, you know, going right across almost the color wheel from one another. Okay, so really at this stage now, what we're going to do is we're just going to mix our purples here. And this is probably where we see the most dramatic differences, right? I mean, you could see someone being like, well, you know, I could probably just live with a cool yellow and maybe a cool blue and maybe a warm red or cool red, because if these are the combinations of colors I get, you know what? I can live with that. I can live with an orange that's like this. Let's say we have our warm red and cool yellow. I could live with that orange, and I can use my cool yellow and my cool blue. I'm gonna get a really nice, super saturated green. So why do I need to buy 3 other tubes of paint, Michael? Well, let's investigate. Because if you were to do that, a warm red, cool yellow, and cool blue, you would be very disappointed in about 5 minutes. So let's start with let's say our cool red and cool blue. Let's see what effect we get here. So I'm going to take cool red and cool blue. So I'm going to mix the blue into my red. And again, you can see, man, not too much different than what we had here. Okay. Let's add a bit more blue. Oops. And let's do this again here. I see lots of comments streaming in here, so I'll do my best to take a second to stop and take a look. Right, so pretty close. I think if we added some white to these colors, we would notice that it's just slightly, it would look a little bit more gray than if we added, like, so if we added white to this color, it would look a little bit more gray than if we added white to this color. And at the end of today's episode, I'm going to show you just a couple of resources on how to match any color on Earth with this set of paints that we have. So stay tuned for that. Or maybe remind me of that if I forget as we get closer. So now let's do our warm blue and warm red. All right, so we're going to take our warm blue, which I should probably have just gone to my warm red first, because the blue is generally more dominant than any of the reds that we can use. So you can already see that this color is losing intensity very quickly. Oops. Okay. Alright, so can you imagine if you just had a warm red and a warm blue and you wanted to get a purple? I mean, you got kind of a purple here, but it's a pretty muddy purple. Like, it's going to look like a brownish purple. Okay, and so last but not least, let's mix right across here our warm red and cool blue together. Let's do this over here. I don't know why I just took the blue again. Let's take that off. So just a little bit of cool blue. Okay. Or sorry, a little bit of warm blue, my apologies. I mean, look at how this color behaves here, right? And just lastly, more warm blue. I mean, if you wanted a purple, you'd probably be very frustrated. And again, I did this last week, but I'll show you how I did this. I'm not going to go into this whole story again. I told it last week, but again, this is me when I was on a tour. I bought paint while I was out of town, mixed the color wheel, and this is the purples that I was able to get, because it turned out that my cool red was just still too warm, and when I mixed it together I got these kind of muddy brownish colors. So I opted instead to go back to the art supply store the next day, get a magenta, something much cooler, and you can see the difference is pretty extraordinary between two different color wheels. And that's the benefit of doing this, because if you do this color wheel and you've went and got your paints and you're looking at the screen right now and you're saying, that is so weird, mine looks a lot more like this, what's going on, then I would probably say it's something to do with your reds or your blues. Again, the yellows, you have a little bit more of a leeway there, but it is possible that sometimes people will just get either two yellows which are much cooler or much warmer. Okay, so I think that's good here. Maybe wow, so many comments. To see if there's any people are having conversations with each other. That's great. I just want to see if there's anybody who's asking me something specific. Interesting. Kathy says, my color wheel from September when I started is so much different than this time. I'm learning so much. That is interesting. I would love to hear a little bit more about why that's, or why you feel that that's happened, Kathy. That sounds really cool. Okay, so let's now talk about how to do the next step here. Let's mix our own black. And this is, again, I think one of the things that blows most people's minds because they don't really think it's possible. And 500 years ago, being an artist was, a fairly rare thing. There weren't really art schools as we know them today. There was like masters and apprentices, and you would have maybe 4 or 5 like sort of official artists in a a town of maybe of a 10,000 or so people, and those artists were usually given the commissions by the church and the whatever figure was in charge of that area, king or queen or regent or pope or whatever. The knowledge that they had was often stuff that was based on maybe some of the things they learned, but also things that they developed on their own. And the mixing of color was a very secretive process. And historically, artists have been very reticent to share their knowledge because primarily of something that you may have heard of, which was the Spanish Inquisition, right? So, and various other forms of persecution that happened over the centuries. And because there was this idea that often what artists were doing was pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable at the time, because many people believed that artists were walking a fine line from making pictures into a kind of a witchcraft or alchemy, which because when we're taking 2 colors, let's say a yellow and a blue, and we mix them together and we get a green. For some people, that's a magic. That is absolutely terrifyingly, because what happened to the yellow? Where did the yellow go? Where did the blue go? Now we've just got red. How did that happen? And you can see how alchemy is an obsession with a lot of artists around the mid-ages, because it's like you can mix a color that looks a lot like gold. Well, if you can mix a color that looks like gold, could you maybe just go one step further and actually make gold? And boy, if you could just make actual gold, then maybe you stop making paintings and you just start printing your own money, right? So artists were very secretive, and there's lots of instances. Again, there's a great book. In fact, I'm just going to mention it because I talk about it all the time. Is David Hockney's, here, let's wait for that to load up. David Hockney's Secret Knowledge, and in the back of that book he's got copious notes that are well sourced, that sort of talk about the anxiety and fear that artists had. Like he found like journals and things by some of the great artists. So this is also a great documentary on YouTube here, David Hockney's Secret Knowledge. So there was a BBC documentary. You can watch both episodes. But the book, I'm not sure why everything's going so slow tonight. There's the... Okay, it's not loading up, but that's what the cover looks like. Let's see if this... Okay, well, I don't know. Well, maybe I'll come back to it as it comes up. So let's move on, because what I want to talk about next is, again, mixing our own black and how to mix black. There's lots of different ways that we can go about this, but essentially we're going to be mixing our warm red, cool blue, and cool yellow together. And you can see here's sort of approximate, this is sort of the approximate recipe, if you will. So if we think about adding those 3 colors together, this is why it kind of works. is because when we mix the warm red and the cool blue together, which is the color we just finished doing here on the color wheel, we noticed it was the muddiest, the least intense purple. For some of you might realize it's not too bad. If I had to, I could probably make it work. But I guarantee you, you'd probably be a little bit frustrated with it, because we've got our warm red, cool blue are almost opposite from one another on the color wheel. And when colors are opposite from one another on the color wheel, they cross over the neutral core. So the resulting color is kind of this very muddy purple, right? So here's the purple hue spectrum here, and we're just right up close here. To get it to go right through the middle, we're going to add a little bit of that cool yellow, and it just pulls this color here, goes right into the middle, and then we're going to get a black. So let's just make and yeah, let's do that before I come back to these graphics here. Just making sure everything's in focus. So we got quite the messy palette, if I just remember. That's why I drew this little line there. Sometimes I can just look at that and go like, okay, that's the top of my palette. So let's take our cool blue and our warm red and mix them together. Again, you can see it's already looks kind of like a brown, not surprisingly at all, right? But, and if you want, you could certainly use that color as a brown. But I'm going to take some of my cool yellow and mix this in here. So let's zoom in. So you can see what happens here. I'll take a bit more yellow. So actually this is still looking very brown, which probably tells me that I need a little bit more blue. Let's put a bit more of that blue in here. I think I just overdid it with that red. So let's take a bit more, or I overdid it with the yellow. Come on. Okay. That looks... Oops, my hand keeps getting in the way. So there we go. We've got a very dark color. All right. Which might be... Which is usually... I mean, I've done dozens and dozens... Like, here. Again, this is this Van Gogh painting we did for Halloween. There's no... I don't think I used a drop of black in this painting. This is just this exact color combination in the background, and I used it to make the grays and all of the, you know, mixing it into the yellows and everything. So there's not any black in here. I don't think so. Anyway, unless I did a little bit of, maybe a little bit of down on the very bottom there, but okay. So I'm going to take my black now, and I'm just going to paint it in the center here. It's still a little wet. You can even see as it gets a little bit thin, it starts to look gray just because that's the white of the canvas showing through, right? And I imagine there's probably a few people who are doing this and are like, ah, it still looks too brown. It's not easy. This is sort of this is kind of taking some of these concepts and pushing them a little bit, but it's just a matter of sort of playing with these colors until you get a combination that works. Again, if it looks a little bit too brown, that probably means you've got a little bit too much yellow and red, and you just need to balance it out with some blue. If it looks a little bit too greenish, that means you've got a little bit too much cold yellow and cool blue, you need to add a little bit more red. And if it looks maybe a little bit too purpley, just means you need to add a little bit more yellow. And sometimes the color might look pretty good like this, but once we add a little bit of white to it, which is our next step here, you might go, oh, that still looks very blue. Which, you know, because the white is going to reveal the actual colors in here a little bit more. You know, when a color is really dark, it can be kind of hard to see what the actual true color is. Okay. Oh my goodness. I'm just reading here. So Kathy says, my purples were so different mostly from mixing it this time versus in the past. And I realized how little paint is needed to change a color. That's a great thing to notice, actually. That's really important, because often when I do these classes in person, I notice when people make a mixture, people will say, like, oh, I'm out of space on my palette, like, 5 colors in. You're like, you don't need to mix that much paint. Just slow down a little bit, right? Okay, so now let's take a little bit of white. Okay, I thought that might happen because it's got a little bit. Now we're not going to use too much white today, but it's handy to have it. So we've got our white that I just squeezed out here. I just take some here. And maybe we'll take a little bit of this dark color that we just made. Mix it together. Look at that. We've got a gray. I just think that's like the coolest thing in the world, right? I mean, if we add more to it, we're going to get a darker gray. If we add more white, we're going to get a lighter gray. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, but again, if I wanted this to be a lighter gray, I'd probably just wipe this paint off and start again, because adding more and more of that white to it is going to be problematic, right? I would maybe do something like this and just mix it to the side, because it'll be much easier to darken that color than it is to lighten it. And this doesn't have to be perfect. Right, as you can see, it's a little blobby on one side. That's okay. Right, we're just making paintings here. We're not curing cancer. So we're just doing the best we can, especially if you're just beginning. And there's our gray. So I find, if we think of this area in the center of this image here as being the neutral core, and where everything gets darker and darker, and if we add a little bit of white to it, it gets gray. That is, I think, a really important realization to have. Oh, and sorry, Dolores mentioned, hi everyone, I'm not doing so well tonight. I fell Friday morning cracking my left humerus near my shoulder. Oh, my right painting arm still works well. I also broke my shoulder a few years ago, and I'm still dealing with those issues. Mostly 90%, 95% better. The range of motion's not quite there. I had to go through physio like 3 times a week. Oh, it was a nightmare. So I hope you get better as soon as possible. That is horrible news. I'm so sorry to hear that, Dolores. wow, everyone else is, there's so many comments and people wishing best recovery there for you as well. Okay. I'm just, I can see I'm just being a little anal retentive, but let's say I've got little finger smudges here. I can use an eraser to try to get rid of it, but I can also just paint over it. Just take my brush, paint any of those little things out if you want. You don't have to, but if you want a nice, perfect color wheel, the kind of color wheel that is going to be hung in museums next to the Mona Lisa, then this might be the best way to go about it. Maybe. Okay. So, next up, I want to talk about, let's go here. Oh, you know what? Actually, I just wanted to mention, so here's how we got our black, right? We mixed our cool yellow, cool blue, warm red together. It is possible that we could try a number of other combinations to do this, and I mean, I was thinking about maybe doing this, but I think I'm just going to keep moving forward. The reason why I think this may not be quite as effective, let's say warm red and warm blue and cool red, is because, like, on paper, this should work, right? Because we've got a color crossing over the center here, very close to, and then we add red. The difference is yellow is not a very dominant color. It's, in terms of its value, again, we'll talk about this in a few days, it's much lighter than any of the other colors. That's why it changes value and hue so quickly when we add another color to it. So it's more likely that what we end up with here is a purple that we add yellow to, and I think you'd have a little bit of trouble pulling that color in, because that warm yellow I don't think is going to be quite as intense. Anyway, I just thought I would just mention that it is possible using this color wheel to try making it black in various other ways. I just don't think it's going to be quite as intense of a color as the one we just did. So we just mixed here our own gray, and so that's obviously just mixing our black and adding white to it. And you can add as much or as little white, or you could go white and add this color to it, which I've done many times before. Often when I'm making these paintings, I'll make a large batch of this black and sort of have it sitting there, and then I can sort of dip into it and therefore darken existing colors that I have on my palette. So I didn't put, I guess one thing I would add going forward is, why do we even need to do this? Why do we need to learn how to mix our own gray and mix our own black? And that's a great question. Thank you for asking. I just gotta take a sip of tea. So the reason why, first of all, it's helpful to know how to mix your own black and gray, because if you don't have a black with you, then here's how you can do it. The other thing is black is a very dominant color. Again, we're going to use black in a few weeks when we mix our value scale together. But black will take over everything and flatten, and it just sort of sucks the life out of all of your colors. So the color we made here, this black, is not quite pure black. It's maybe like 95% of the way to black. It's actually a little bit on the grayer area, not quite black. And so it's great for backgrounds, right? Because it's going to be dark, but it also kind of just subtly kind of floats a little backwards in the painting. Whereas black will, especially if you use it in its purest form, will sit right on the top surface of the painting. And that's why I was thinking to myself, is that black there? I probably didn't. It's probably just the same color that I just mixed. But if we were to put black right on here, it would be really obvious, because it just sits right on the surface. And if you think of a painting like a window right? We want everything to sort of be behind the window or on the other side of the window. If we put black on the painting in its purest form, it will look like a bug stuck to the window, maybe even on our side of the window, right? So next up here, I want to talk about mixing our own browns. So I just, as I was getting ready, I was like realizing, you know what, I need to update the template. So let's do that. What the reason why you see me, I just maybe just mentioned this while I'm here. If you're saying like, why does he keep getting different pencils? The reason why I'm getting different pencils is, you know, here's a 7B pencil. Here's a B pencil, which is what I use to do these lines, and the B pencil is going to smudge a little bit more. So I just took an extra second to find an HB pencil, because if you're going to be drawing on your canvas, you probably don't want that pencil to be smudging all over the place, right? So I'm going to draw a couple of circles. I'm going to do one here. And so I'm just going around here because I'm going to paint a few different browns. I have a smaller one. Is that one a little bit smaller? So I just did 4 of these on each corner. Let me just see it. This works. Because one of these is going to be for our warm browns, and one of them is going to be for our cool browns, and then we're going to do a warm skin tone and a cool skin tone. Okay. So, let me see. I don't know how visible that is, but again, I'll update the template there so that you can see how this works. Okay, maybe even before, I just want to show. So in order to mix these colors to make a warm brown, we're going to take our warm colors and mix them together. So primarily we're going to be mixing an orange, right? Warm red, warm yellow with a little bit of blue. And the same thing when we're doing the cool, instead we're just using all 3 cool colors, right? So let's begin with, let's do a warm brown. That's probably the most common brown people will make. So let's take our warm yellow. And actually, I'll probably, maybe even a little bit less red. We don't want to be too red, or I guess it sort of depends, because we can literally make millions of different kinds of purples here, right? So we take our orange, so warm yellow, warm red. Let's take a bit of warm blue. And maybe I'm just going to mix a couple of versions of it here. So I'll paint because I'm going to make a little bit of a darker one just below here. Probably probably next time I do this, I might do it a little bit differently. Every time things are going to get a little bit more advanced, I think, or just more well thought through. So let's now do this again. I'm just going to add a little bit more blue to it. Now if I add a lot more blue, you can see it's going to be much darker, but it also appears more bluish, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. All right, so there's more warm red, warm blue together, and just far less warm yellow. There's a little bit in there, but much less. Okay. Let's do that. Okay. And maybe while we're right here, let's add a little bit. Basically, what let's do the cool colors first. We'll just stay here because I was going to do the skin tones next. But we'll do one thing at a time, Michael. So the opposite side of this here. So I'm putting my. Maybe it's also worth just mentioning that the reason why I'm putting my warm brown over here is our warmest color or colors or a warm color, and we're going to talk about this when we talk about color temperatures. We have a whole episode based on that coming up. Is that a warm color by definition is a color that leans towards orange, versus a cool color is a color that leans towards green, right? So any color that's got a bit of an orange cast to it is warmer, right? None of these colors have really any like orangey pigments in them whatsoever, right? Neither does this cool red. So that's why I'm putting my warm brown over here. I'm going to put our cool brown over here because we can still make a brown with cool colors. It's just going to look a little bit different than that. Okay, so let's do the same thing here. So I'm going to take some cool blue and cool red. Let's mix that together. Get a kind of a nice purple. And now let's add some yellow to it. You can see it's kind of going a bit kind of gray almost. So let me see. So they're kind of a grayish green. So what that just tells me is that there's maybe a lot of blue and red here, or blue and yellow. And I want to add a lot more red to this color to bring it back into the purple zone. So this is actually a much lighter version. Let's just do this one with, or that's much darker. I'm just going to mix one with a lot more yellow in here. In fact, let's do that again. Okay, and then here I'm just going to go to the darker purple that or darker brown, and put that in. So we can now see them a little bit side by side, how different these colors actually are. They're all different kinds of browns, but they're also very different, right? Like we would use them for different parts of paintings, right? So we might use this, I don't know, like maybe on an apple or something. This would be a perfect color, like especially this bottom down here as kind of part of a shadow. Okay. So now that we've got our browns mixed, and I'll write down, I'm going to notate on here what some of these things are shortly, once things dry a little bit. Let's sort of redo that, but we're going to now mix some skin tones. And basically we're going to learn, I'm going to mix maybe two sort of very generic skin tones. I can realize that this could be like a contentious thing to sort of mix a skin tone. I've got a few tubes of paint that are just called skin tone, and what does that usually mean? It's usually a Caucasian skin tone. Now things have we're a little bit more of an enlightened time where we don't just assume skin tone means a skin color, a Caucasian skin color, but there's obviously billions of other people who have skin tones that don't look Caucasian, right? And there's people who are Caucasian who might have even lighter skin tones than a so-called skin tone paint, right? So we're going to basically mix our brown, but we're just going to add a little bit of white, and depending on how much white in there you add, you're going to get different variations. So I just want to mix this again, right? We could just add white to the brown that we did before, but I think we just want to do a little bit more nuanced version of this brown, because this brown we made would work really well for hair, but maybe a little bit less so for skin color. So this time I'm going to start out with some yellow, warm yellow. I'm going to use a little bit less red than I had before. I want a fairly light orange. And then I'm going to add a little bit of blue to this mixture. Maybe a little bit more red. Okay, so it looks like on camera this looks like just like an orange, and it is. You could say that it's orange for sure. It's but there's just a little bit of blue in there that's just pulling it from here. Like, so basically what we did is we mixed our warm yellow and warm red together, and then we added some warm blue, and it's pulling that color inward. So now what I want to do is I'm going to take some white and mix into this color. Right, so that doesn't even really look like my skin tone. Right, it still is like kind of orangey. So if it's a little bit like that, let's add just a little bit more red in here. Now there's, in fact, let's go even further. Just a tiny bit more red. There we go. It's pretty subtle. It kind of, you're getting a little bit of a peachy color. In fact, let me do this again. So what I would do, another way of going about this is instead to take warm yellow and warm red, and we mix these together to create an orange. And if we just take some white and mix it into this color, we're going to start getting a kind of a peachy color. This is what I would use maybe for like a blush on someone's face, right on their cheeks. Again, I'm not sure how it looks like on camera, but if I just take a little bit of blue here, that might be another way for people to see how this can work. And that's just going to make it a little bit, I mean, we basically get to the same place. But, you know, if I want to make this a darker skin tone, I've got my brown here. Okay. Obviously, if we're painting someone's face, we're going to have quite the variation no matter what race they're from, because we're going to have highlights in all sorts of different ways. But this gives us a pretty good idea of what we would call like the local color, right? So I would probably paint a color like this, and then I'd add, in some instances, a little bit more warm red and white in order to get closer to this, right? I can still use this color, might be in some of these darker areas, right? So it's just sort of understanding that this is the beginning to how to mix like really complicated skin tones. So let's do the other side here. We're going to mix a cool skin tone. So let's sort of do this. Looks like I need a little bit more cool yellow. So we can sort of do the opposite. We're just going to take the cool yellow and warm red. It's a lot of red. Let's take a little bit of white. And let's take a little bit of brown. Okay, and if we want to make this a little bit of a darker skin tone, then I would just take some more warm Did I put... I wonder what blue I put in there. I think I put a little bit of the warm blue in there, which is going to drive me crazy. Yeah, I did. Ah! So let's just mix that together. I mean, I can, every time I'm mixing here, I'm like, well, that could be the brown I paint with. I don't know. I mean, it really would depend on the person that we're painting and the kind of light that they're in. Because I could be painting the pastiest white guy on earth, but I might be using some very dark browns for their skin tone if they were in a dark room and the light was really dark on them, right? Okay. Ah, I forgot to paint the other one. Wow, I got the color mixed. Okay. So, in terms, let me see. Oh, I guess that was, I forgot I was going to share. That was step 25, and that's sort of my rough recommendations in terms of colors. Now, maybe it probably should have just is maybe basically the same as this, just adding however much white you want to actually put in that paint. Okay, so I am going to blow dry this, and then I'm going to add a little bit of notations on top of it really quickly, and then I'll start to wrap up. So if you have any specific questions about what we've been doing today, put them in the chat right now, and that way I'll get to them before we sign off for today. So I'm just going to use my hair dryer just to kind of lock in the paint. Okay. So what I want to do here is I just want to write inside that this is in fact my neutral core, and I did write it before it was on the handout, right? But after having now painted white mixed in with my dark color, my black, surprise, surprise, it disappeared. Which doesn't, I mean, that doesn't surprise me. It's just, it can be a little bit frustrating for some people, and I do show some techniques of how to deal with this. So what I'm going to be using, maybe just before I do this, I'll just show you. I'm going to be using a Posca pen, Uni Posca pen. This is an acrylic paint pen. I think they're about like $4, $5, $6 at your local art supply store, and I've used them many times for often doing little details in painting. They're certainly very helpful for signing a painting, or for doing what we're doing here, writing any kinds of text, very small details. When we did the Grandma Moses painting, we also used one of these pens, because otherwise it would have just taken forever to do here. The neutral core. Let's do this on this one here. I mean, if you can imagine trying to do this with a paintbrush, it would drive you nuts. You could use a Sharpie if you had nothing else. The thing with the Sharpie, though, is that Sharpies aren't intended for as an art material. They're really just for, like, you know, your everyday household use or industrial use. And over time, a Sharpie is going to go, the color's going to change. It's going to become usually a bit of a purpley kind of color, so it's not light fast, right? It will change as light hits it. So if you write something with a Sharpie, you put it in your window where it's facing the sun, even as soon as a couple of days later, you'll notice that the color's going to change. It may even bleed out a little bit. So it's not archival, not ideal as an art material, but if this is just your color wheel and you could really care less, then by all means go right to it. So this is our warm brown. And this is our cool brown. And these are this is a warm and this is going to be my cool skin tone. You could write all these out with pencil first. I'm actually going to go backwards here. That way I don't get to the end here and don't have enough room for the E. Okay. So that's my color wheel, fully annotated, and I think this should give us a pretty good guide for how we're going to for all the paintings that we're going to make going forward, right? Because I wanted to show, maybe just lastly, and is how we can use some of the tools online. And you've seen me do this in a number of episodes. I should have got this queued up here, but in the description below, there is, in every episode, I put these links in there. Okay, so finally this loaded up. This is the link to the David Hockney book I mentioned earlier, and at the very back of that book, there is some awesome sources going back 400, 500, 600 years talking about the secretive methods artists use. I didn't mention it earlier, but if you keep in mind that Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, all of those great artists who also happen to be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they're also working and were familiar with and friends of Galileo Galilei, right? The famous astronomer. And Galileo was jailed because he said that the sun was at the center of our solar system, not the Earth, right? And so there was this, very tenuous relationship between the church and science, and art was considered a kind of a science, right? And a lot of those artists saw what happened to Galileo and were like, yeah, you know what, maybe best not to be too public about how we do what we do here in these studios, because if they're locking up Galileo for looking through a little telescope and all that kind of stuff, it's not too far out of the range of possibilities for them to come in and say, how on earth, you're telling me you took a yellow and a blue, you mix those together and you get a green? Yeah, that's some kind of thing going on there beyond the boundaries of physics. Anyway, there's links down below for this, and so let's see if I could find a picture here. Things are going pretty slow here. Not any supplies in there. Let's go to the Dropbox folder. What would be... Let's just upload this image here. Chi Bai Chi was really probably one of the greatest Chinese painters of all time. This was a really fun painting that we made. So anyway, what I've done here is you can, in the video description below, you'll see there's always these links that I put down here. And I think just while we're talking about being able to mix any color, I want to show you that we can do any color in here. So we can upload any image to this website, and we can click around on any of these colors. Maybe let's just zoom in a bit. Wow, things are just being real slow here. Yeah, maybe let's take this blue, and then let's pick that color. So what it's showing me is that this is the area, right? You notice every time I'm moving around, the colors are changing, right? And these numbers are changing. But I was going to do this blue. So let's do this blue, and it's telling us where we are. And for me, that's probably enough information. What I like doing is copying this hex number. And if you're a designer, you're probably very familiar with that. And here we have the RGB values. And then I go to this other website, and again, that's in the description below. And then I put this in here, and this gives me a little bit more of a visualization that's similar to what we've just been doing. So what this tells me, right, is that this color is, if we take this all the way out to the edge here, right, this is our cool blue. Here's our warm blue. Here's our cool red. Here's our warm red right here. Here's our warm yellow right there. Here's our cool yellow. Look how quickly it goes into the green, right? Cool yellow. And then all the way back to our cool blue. So if we just put that number back in here, that this is telling me that if I pull this all the way out, that I'm going right into the cool colors, the cool value, as opposed to if it was over here, then I could go, oh, that's much warmer of a color. So this is a cool blue that is also approaching the center of the color wheel, right? Because it's lost some saturation. One way we can do that is by adding the opposite colors, right? Which are maybe a bit of an orange, slightly adding a bit of orange to that color. And then it's also got a bit of white in here. So maybe I just want to show you that we can mix something pretty close to this. So, I'll use, this was from the previous class here. So just as a little quick thing here, so let's try to mix the color we see on the screen. So I'm going to take some of my cool blue. Let's do this right down here. Cool blue. On its own, right, you could see way too intense. Right? If we just add some white to this color, in fact, let's just do that right here. Well, I mean, that's too bright, right? It's not going to be very helpful. But if we add a little bit of darker color to this, right, turn it, rather than just a black, we turn it to a gray. You start getting closer and closer. In fact, let me mix this right here. Or you know what, let's do the opposite. Got a little bit more room on there. All right, so I'm just going to add, where's my dark color here? Maybe just use this color right here. All right, maybe just a little bit more white. But either way, we're pretty close, right? And in fact, let's just paint. All right, so again, I think we need just a little bit more. A little bit darker. But remember, to get that darker color, what we did is we took some warm red. So maybe let's just mix more of our dark color. I've got all this paint that's just going to go to waste anyway. So let's just, one final little demo, right? So this was our warm red, cool yellow, and cool blue here to make our darkest color. That's a little bit too dark, so let's just add a bit of white. Right, it's kind of a grayish blue. I think we just need more white and our dark color, and maybe just slightly less of that blue. Right, it's sort of in there. It's a little bit, I mean, we just have to kind of play with these color combinations just a little bit. But you could see we're sort of in the ballpark, right? And for most people, that's probably more than close enough. Okay. So you've seen me use those techniques many times. And sometimes it's helpful for me too, because sometimes I'm looking at a painting and I'm like, I can't tell, especially when we get a color that is been modified like this, right? It can be a little bit, it's like, is that a warm blue or a cool blue gray, right? It's there's a gray in there, but is the basis of like there's a blue, it's a blue gray, but is it a warm blue gray or a cool blue gray? Because every color is a little bit warmer or cooler, right? There's none that sit right on the line. One is always just a little bit, and yeah, right on that line, it can be very hard to tell the difference. That's why using something like this, I upload a picture, and then I can look and I go like, oh, well, that is clearly a cool blue. Because if I tried to do that with my warm blue, I would just be sitting here losing my mind, like, what is going on? This is very frustrating. So that's sort of a little solution. And you'll see, I mean, I could do a whole episode where we could just match colors all episode, and we can just see how this particular palette, we can literally mix billions and billions of different colors. And it is, I think, as far as I'm concerned, it does a kind of magical transformation of one color into another. So let me see. Tanya says that would be a great exercise. Try to match colors. Well, you know what we do in the rest of these Master Studies episodes is we've been matching colors for hundreds and hundreds of paintings, whether it's Van Gogh or Tom Thompson or Francisco Goya, right? Lee Kieran. We painted Batman. I mean, you could see there's Mona Lisa in here, Giorgio O'Keeffe. I mean, really the most famous artists of all time we've already tackled, and we've matched as pretty well most of the colors from many of those paintings. So I've got like dozens of these things kicking around the studio that's still waiting to be documented. Like here's Edward Hopper's very famous The Nighthawks. Here's a David Milne. It's signed right there on the bottom, right? I mean, Diego Rivera, right? And so we tried to match colors for all of these paintings. So basically, that's what this whole Master Studies series is all about. So I guess we could do just a generic episode where I just generically mix a whole bunch of random colors, but since we're doing every episode, it's sort of, you know. But I mean, I'm open to it. I'm certainly open to any of your suggestions. So thank you everyone for painting along with me, for learning how to paint the inside of the color wheel, mixing our own blacks, grays, and browns. This is the key to painting anything. We can make any painting with just these simple 7 colors, and we'll prove it. I've proven it over, this is the 180th painting we've made over the past few years, and we're going to keep on making more. So please continue joining me and painting with me over the next few weeks, because I think what we've learned here is the magic trick. Next few episodes, we're going to apply it. We're going to learn why it's so powerful. And when we start talking about warm and cool colors, which we haven't really talked about yet, your mind is going to be blown, because that's the true secret to all great paintings that every great master artist has been using in their artwork. Some have played with it and done the opposite with it, but they know the basics of it in order to kind of create some weird effects with warm and cool colors. But that's a whole other episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when the new episodes are coming up. There's a PayPal link if you want to support the channel with a small or large donation. You can also send a e-transfer or a good old-fashioned check. Just contact me through my website or through the Facebook group. And all those links are down below. Join the Facebook group. You can upload anything you've been working on, especially things you might have problems or questions on, because once a month, in just a few weeks, we're going to go through all the work that's on there, because there's a lot of stuff that's been accumulating, and I'll give you my feedback on how to make it even better. So join me on Thursday. We're going to do more advanced painting. Might be out of the range for some of the beginner artists here, but you're certainly welcome to tune in and just get an idea of how we apply all of these techniques and knowledge So when we paint Thomas Gainsborough's famous Blue Boy painting, you can go see it. It's at the well, actually, it won't. It's usually at the Huntington Museum in Los Angeles. It's going to be in England for a very special exhibition, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to paint that painting. So it very, very rarely leaves the United States. It's going back to England where it was made for an exhibition opening in just a couple of days. Anyway, thank you everyone for joining me for painting along once again. And yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say, folks. We'll see you again. Have a great afternoon. Good night.